Con ustedes, Per Bylund.
Good morning. I love that song. Machine Head. The only issue is, how do you transition from heavy metal to entrepreneurship? I have no idea. So I'm just going to dig in, okay? We're going to talk about entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurship is key to freedom and to prosperity. And I'm going to start in the place for knowledge in the world, Twitter. So, here's a tweet that I wrote almost 10 years ago. It has had a little over 2 million views so far. And it's a tweet that still pisses people off quite a bit. Now, why is that? It's just asking a question. Or rather, it's asking a question and saying there's a better question. To say what causes poverty, a common question, right? People want to know where does poverty come from? How come people are poor? That shouldn't be the case. Well, nothing causes poverty. It's the original state. Instead, the real question is, what causes prosperity? That's the question that should be asked. Where does prosperity come from? Where does wealth come from? Where does well-being come from? That's the real question that we should ask and answer, because that's how we can achieve it. Right? Now, to understand that, we need to figure out what is the contrast between prosperity and poverty. Well, the thing is that poverty is to prosperity just what death is to life. Or, if you wish, what ignorance is to knowledge. Because death is simply not having life. Ignorance is simply not having knowledge. And poverty is simply not having prosperity. That's all there is to it. So it is an absence. If you're poor, it means you don't have prosperity. A poor country does not have prosperity. Which, of course, raises the question, what the heck is prosperity? So I consulted a dictionary and I asked, what is prosperity? And the dictionary answered, it's the state of being prosperous. That's not very helpful. What are we going to do with that? Okay, so I asked the dictionary, what is prosperous? Well, I did have an answer to that. So it said it's being successful in material terms, flourishing financially. Not necessarily in terms of money, but in terms of purchasing power, and material terms, in terms of having all the conveniences and comforts in life. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means that we flourish when we have the means, the stuff in a sense, to lead a good life, to experience well-being. So if we have all that is necessary for us to have this convenience and this comfort. Funny thing is, there is a word for this. It's a good. In economics, a good is that means. It's something that we can use to satisfy a want, to become better off. So if we're hungry, we eat food. If we're in the wrong place, we travel somewhere. That's a good. It's a scarce thing. It's something that we can use and that we understand that we can use to take us to a better place. And of course, it's something that we don't already have, so we might have to produce it or trade with someone else to get it. So in a sense, the greater ability we have together as a society to produce goods, the better off we are. Because the more means we have to satisfy our wants. So, in other words, the greater the ability to produce, the more prosperous we are. Okay, so does that mean then that if we just produce more stuff, we're better off? Because that seems to be what GDP is about. When we talk about economic growth, just say, produce more crap. more stuff, and we're better off. No, it's not just stuff, it's the right stuff. It's stuff that actually makes a difference to people, stuff that satisfies consumers' wants, that make people better off, and it's something that satisfies them on their own terms. The consumer must choose the good. They must value the good themselves. It also has to be on the right time. It's not enough to say that, well, if someone wants ice cream, I'll just produce ice cream, because ice cream in winter is not all that much fun. And a couple of examples of this is this tablet PC here. It was the wrong time. The tablet PC was Microsoft's innovation and invention some decade before the iPad. No one bought it because no one understood what it was for. No one wanted it. Okay, so it was a failure, complete failure. Of course, we also had to produce in an appropriate way, produce in a way so we don't waste resources, so we don't waste the means of production that we have already. But there's another issue. Production takes time. If we could produce like this instantaneously, it's not really an issue, because then we can just consult people and say, you look hungry, let me produce food. Bam, food. That's not it, though. Because the problem is that production takes a whole lot of time. Because to produce a new product, we have to take it through an ideation phase. We have to figure out what to do and how to do it and what it's going to do for consumers. Then develop it and produce it and then sell it. That can take many years. We have to invest in this production capability. We have to build production capacity, build a factory, build a railroad to transport things. And we perhaps might need to secure the supply chain. Make sure that we can connect all those dots and get all those, say, iron ore, into steel, into cars, and then have the car available to people at the right place at the right time. That takes a lot of time. So the question then is, how can you know what consumers want in the future? If you want to make an investment today to satisfy consumers who might want a car in 5 years, how do you know what kind of car they want in 5 years? Well, that's really hard, right? That's really difficult. There's another problem, though. A bigger one, perhaps. It's not only about time, it's this issue. You might recognize this guy, Steve Jobs, one of the founders of Apple. He said it's really hard to design products by focus groups, sit people down, some consumers, and ask them, what would you like in your life? What kind of gadgets should we produce for you? Because a lot of times, he says, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And that's very often the case. I think you have this experience too, right? You go into a store and you think you know what you want to buy. You might have a shopping list, and then you see something else and go, oh, that's on sale, or that looks pretty tasty today, and you buy something else, right? We all have this experience. Steve Jobs knew this. Henry Ford also knew this, but he had a different way of putting it. He said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. No one wanted cars, because that was just for the rich people. Nah, I have a horse and I have a carriage. All I need is for it to take me someplace faster. Well, a car, he thought, was much better solution to the problem. A much better way of satisfying consumers on consumers' own terms that consumers might not understand yet. So the entrepreneur, in this case Henry Ford, will need to figure that out before consumers themselves know it. Now, how is that for a problem? That's pretty hard, right? Well, entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, good entrepreneurs, utilize an entrepreneurial calculus. They understand that by creating profit, they can themselves profit. I don't mean that they create money. I don't mean that they create a successful business only. What I mean is that they create profit for consumers. So, this is a little screwed up, but value for the consumer needs to be greater than the price they pay, or they will not buy it. And the price needs to be higher than the cost of production, or the entrepreneur will not earn a profit. So the consumer's profit is this. Wow. Is this value greater than price? If the entrepreneur can provide a good that to the consumer is worth a lot more than the price they're paying, the consumer profits. The consumer benefits, the consumer earns a profit in subjective terms. If the entrepreneur can also keep the price or keep the cost lower than the price, the entrepreneur will earn a profit as well. Both earn a profit. The consumer in subjective terms for themselves in terms of satisfaction, the entrepreneur in objective terms, in money. Okay, so what does this mean for what entrepreneurs actually do then? Well, it means that they have to start by imagining, just like Steve Jobs and Henry Ford, how can they be of service to consumers? How can they best satisfy consumers? And then, from that, say, what can consumers possibly want to pay to get this thing that I can supply them with? And then, finally, if this is the price I think they're more than willing to pay, how can I produce it at a cost that is much lower so that I can get something for myself as well? See how this starts with consumers' satisfaction, then consumers' profit, which is how you sell it, and then last thing, the entrepreneur's profit. That's how you have to think about it. Failed entrepreneurs tend to think about it the other way around. They say, I want to produce this thing, and then how much does it cost me? Add a profit margin, that's the price, and then they try to sell it. That's an excellent way of failing. Don't do that. So, profit might motivate you as an entrepreneur, but it doesn't win. What wins is value of what you're producing, how you're at service to consumers. So what you should do is compete on value first, how you satisfy consumers, make them better off, and never ever enter a business or a market where you compete on cost, where the value is already set. Because competing on cost with companies already in business, how are you going to beat them? They already have the experiences, they already have the supply chains, they already have the knowledge and everything. That's stupid to do that. Okay, so what you should do is always innovate and disrupt. So, creative destruction is one of those terms that gets thrown around. It means you create something of much greater value, much like Henry Ford with the affordable automobile, the affordable car. Create that, and people will choose that instead, and as a result, that destroys the faster horses business. So you break free from that status quo, and here are two examples, right? The smartphone, which completely changed how we behave and everything, but it created a lot of value for us, and it outcompeted the flip phone, if you recall those. And the printing press, same thing, completely changed everything because it provided new value that no one knew that they wanted. So what does this mean? Well, it means that entrepreneurs are in the business of creating our future. Think about that. They imagine what they can do to serve us in the best way possible, and then they try to figure out how to do that in a way that is profitable so that they can sell it at a price that is higher than the cost. So they can choose a cost that is lower than the price that they think they can charge for the product. Okay, but fine. Does this mean that entrepreneurs are right? How can we know that entrepreneurs will actually produce something that will make people better off? How can we know that entrepreneurs will figure out the right thing? Can't the entrepreneurs invest in and produce something that is super silly? Have you heard of the pet rock? You can sell a rock and pretend that it's a pet. It was a success. It made the guy a millionaire in the 70s. Silly ideas might actually turn out to be good ideas, and good ideas might turn out to be disastrous and really bad. So how do we know that they're right? Well, we let consumers decide, because the value is for the consumers. So we let consumer well-being be the guide and the consumer be king. Because an entrepreneur can never do more then produce something, and then offer it for sale. But the entrepreneur cannot say to consumers, you have to buy this. That's impossible. You don't have the right, you don't have the muscle, you don't have anything. All you can do is offer it for sale at a price that consumers are willing to pay. If you offer it for sale at a price too high, how many are you going to sell? None. You're not going to sell enough. So you have to lower the price. The consumer is king. The consumer has to be allowed to choose whether, what, when, and how to buy, and then entrepreneurs can compete to produce value for the consumers. This makes entrepreneurs, like I said a minute ago, they're servants. Entrepreneurs are not kings. Big business leaders are not kings. They don't really have power. Because all they can do is try to beat other entrepreneurs at serving consumers better. And by doing that, they might get profit if they produce at a cost that is lower than the price that consumers want to pay. Okay, fine. Even if we accept this, what about exploitation? You might recall this guy with a big beard. It's not Santa Claus, but he does offer free stuff. Okay, Karl Marx. Okay, so what about exploitation? Do entrepreneurs exploit people? Does profit exploit people? No, because there are some studies showing that of all the value produced by entrepreneurs, they themselves capture 10%, their customers capture 90%. And I think this is a study on Jeff Bezos and Amazon.com. Now you should take this with a grain of salt because this is an attempt to calculate consumer value in objective terms. But we already said that consumers, they gain in subjective terms, in terms of well-being. Look at this. What if you're an unsuccessful entrepreneur? How many think that you can take 10% of your losses and give it to your customers? No, of course not. So, if you win, if you produce something of great value, you get perhaps 10% of it. If you lose and produce something that is not of enough value, you lose the whole investment. And of course, costs also precede revenue. You have to invest before you can produce, before you can sell, which means you have the cost first, you have the revenue later. This includes workers. So if you invest in a business and start producing, and it turns out that you're an idiot, you're producing something that no one wants, are you going to create jobs? Yes. Are you going to pay your workers? Yes. Are you going to sell products? No. So there you are, you have paid all your bills, you have all the products, but you have no profit. So you're screwed, but you have already paid your workers and suppliers and whoever else, because those costs happen before there are any profits left. Okay, so this also means that how much are entrepreneurs willing to pay workers in their businesses? Well, they look at how much value can I produce here? Okay, based off of that value, how much can I pay workers? So the value they expect to produce justifies the cost they take on. In other words, it's the entrepreneur's imagination of the value that they create that allows them to pay workers in the first place, whether they're right or wrong. Okay, so but what about flaws and faults and fouls? And what if they misbehave? Don't entrepreneurs misbehave? Well, sometimes they do. Therefore, governments impose regulations in order to make sure that they do not cheat us, do not sell products that are dangerous, they do not destroy the environment, whatever else. The issue here is, what is the real cost of this? We have to ask that question. Not only what is the benefit if it works out, but also what is the real cost of implementing these restrictions or limitations? Because these are limitations on their actions. So if we say you cannot do this over here, that means any entrepreneur who imagined that they could serve consumers around here, they will not be able to do so. So they will do something else instead. Well, wouldn't they try to produce the highest value they can to maximize their profits? Yeah, they would. So if they can't pursue this value anymore, but have to choose something else, they have to choose something else that they believe is of lesser value. In other words, we get less value too. By restricting and limiting entrepreneurs, the value created necessarily goes down. And this, of course, also means that entrepreneurs have less of an incentive to innovate and invest in businesses. What this means is that it shifts power from consumers, because consumers never get the products. Consumers never get to say no. Instead, politicians get to say, you cannot. Well, this changes the balance completely, doesn't it? Because I said before that entrepreneurs are servants. Entrepreneurs make money off of serving people, serving consumers. Consumers are king, and consumers get to choose. Well, if you shift power from consumers to politicians, you will never get the value. Entrepreneurs will not invest as much. You will not get the output that you hoped for. This means that the whole economy will be on a lower value trajectory because the entrepreneurs will not invest as much as before. They will not invest as great value as they otherwise would be. And of course, entrepreneurs are inspired of what others have done. So what has already been created, that's something that they will take and, I'm going to do something like this, build off of this. You saw the tablet PC before. You all know the iPad. That came some 10 years later, building off of the tablet PC idea, producing a new type of product at a different point in time. Well, if the tablet PC had not happened, would the iPad have happened? Maybe not. Then we would not have this value. So the whole economy will be on a lower trajectory. It will not go up like this, it will go up like this. And the economy is cumulative. Now that's quite a problem, isn't it? Okay, so now we know how entrepreneurs liberate us, how they free us, because they help satisfy our wants by producing products that make us better off if we allow them. Well, what about the other side of the story? Because regulations, of course, they favor some. If there are regulations in place, whoever is already in the market benefits. Others might not be able to enter. We see this in some industries, particularly my own, higher education, universities. Who can compete with the university? Well, you can't. You need the licensing, you need government certificates, you need all these other things. So you can't really, which is why universities work the same way today as they did 700 years ago. You still have a guy preaching to students, and students take an exam, and that's it. Okay? This is why these protected industries have so little innovation, because they don't have to. They don't have to compete on value. They only compete on cost, which is quite problematic. Now, entrepreneurs can help to liberate us. They're not only on the other side. What I mean by that is, even if there is a lot of regulations, we don't have to ask politicians to remove the regulations. Believe it or not, politicians might not listen. We have many examples throughout history of entrepreneurs who change regulations. I don't mean that they bribe politicians, that happens too. But that they start competing with a highly regulated industry and they topple it. Uber is an example of this, right? Uber launched their service, but it's not a taxi service. It's a ride-sharing service. And therefore, it was not subject to the regulations of taxi businesses. Taxi businesses were protected until Uber entered and said, we're different. So they weren't regulated. Suddenly, the taxi businesses who were protecting their industry said, hey, deregulate us now, we can't compete. Because Uber, they innovated, they focused on value for consumers, not something else. Okay, so now we know that entrepreneurs are key in creating our tomorrow. We want more entrepreneurship, more failed entrepreneurship. We want lower barriers to entry because we don't want any protections for the entrepreneurs who are in business. We want the market to sort them out. We want consumers to decide which entrepreneurs are doing a good job and which entrepreneurs are not. And value is king. Not producers, not entrepreneurs. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with a quote that I personally love. So it's by economist Ludwig von Mises. He says that the driving force of the market process, that's the economy we're all in, that society that we're all in, is provided neither by the consumers nor by the owners of the means of production, not the capitalists either, but by the entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs are the ones who envision and imagine what could be. They are the ones investing in that dream. They are the ones who fail and lose everything if they're wrong, and they are the ones who get a little piece of the pie if they are correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Per. Thank you for your vision, and thank you for your cooperation with the Universidad de la Libertad. Thank you very much. Señoras y señores, Per Bylund. Thank you.